So today we're going to get into forms of communication. The reason why we're going to talk about this is really give ourselves tools to be able to identify unhealthy patterns of communication and how I can identify them and then what I can do to change them. So a lot of times we call this anger management. And I don't like the word management because this is something that I have to have a heart transformation about. And so it's not necessarily managing my behaviors, it's actually being transformed by a program of action that we undertake through the 12 steps. And or however you're experiencing that journey. At some level, we need a transformation of why we're doing what we're doing, and we'll get into family of origin stuff a little bit of these forms of communication. And so we're going to discuss 4 forms of communication. 3 of them are what we don't want to do. Most of us can relate to at least one of them or 2 of them in a form of how we communicate. So we have these 4 forms. We're going to unpack one at a time throughout the weeks, and then we will get to how we want to present ourselves in the form of communication. And so I dislike the management. I have to manage how I communicate. I have to manage my anger. I actually want to be rid of these things. I want to actually have them ripped out root and branch. And I want a whole new system of nourishing my emotional capacity, my emotional stability. And I want to actually get into a place of neutrality. And that's a promise of recovery is I'm not consumed by everything. I'm not over resentful. I'm not overthinking. I'm not over worrying. I'm not in a place of anxiety. I'm not being controlled and driven by fear. Although those things do crop up, they do come in on a daily basis. We're not going to like it. Just doesn't mean like fear is going to evaporate. It is a good emotion. Anger is a good emotion. It's what we do with it. And so one of our promises is that I will be in a place of neutrality. It's not about forgive and forget. It's not about like, I just have to forget all the bad stuff that happened to me, and that's what recovery is. It's not about that at all. It's not about forgiving and forgetting, because that's like another unhealthy thing, almost self-centered, of sweeping things under the rug and going, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. But when the storm comes, and the storm will come, we're not exempt from the storm. And it's going to we'll see where our emotional stability is. We'll see how we react, and can I react in a place of neutrality? It's a beautiful place to be in. And so that's what I mean about anger management. I don't like the title of that to begin with, but it's all about identifying behavioral patterns, seeing what I can do about them, and then taking that to the care of God, to help you change and remove them. It's not about I have to do all this work and I have this homework piled up. I think that there are some tools that are good. I have to engage the work of God in my life. Let's say God is addressing our physical being. It would be unrealistic if I just prayed to God in the morning at 6:30 and didn't work out. I just went down to my little workout station and for leg day and chest day and especially cardio day, because you can't flex that. I'm just going to sit here and pray and meditate and get God to rip my muscles and make me big. He's going to improve my arms and improve my cardio without me taking action. So it's not about doing nothing about it and just praying. It's actually entering into the relationship as a child and letting God parent me, and then observing my behavior, observing my patterns, and going, how do I change this? And so there's going to be some practice. That's what discipline is. That's what discipleship is. It's a set of practices. It's a set of instructions. And so that's what I want to kind of bring into today's conversation of forms of communicating, because we're going to get into the tools of being able to identify behaviors and being able to work on I'm coming under the parenthood of the care of God. And so there are unhealthy ways to communicate and express emotional responses inside of me. I don't want to be reacting to the world around me. I want to be responding. And so there's going to be an emotional outburst in me, but I don't want that to come out of my mouth necessarily. I want to be a good steward of my emotions. I want to be a good steward of my recovery and the changes within me. And then out of that, I can be responsive instead of reactive, if that makes sense. So there's unhealthy ways of emotional responses, taking it out on others, getting physically upset and slamming doors and punching holes in walls, blaming the world around me, blame shifting, stuffing it down. That's not a good way of dealing with things. Having wrongful conversations, I just have to unload my chest and I tell everybody about it. And basically that's gossip. That's not actually relieving yourself. It's just vomiting on the world around you. And you might feel a little bit better, but you're tainting the world around you. Self-harm, even, we can get into practices of just doing obsessive behaviors, biting our fingernails. Like even anxiety can cause your immune system and cold sores and stuff like that, just basic stuff that you wouldn't even think about, that could be harmful to ourselves. Physical and emotional hurt around us, to people around us, typically the people that we care about most. Lying, denial, isolation, blaming, and minimizing. So these are all forms of emotional responses inside of us to the world around us, to the world, the outside cues. This is going to be a response inside of us, and those are unhealthy examples. So we want to get in a place of neutrality, a place of healthy responses instead of emotional reactions. So in the 4 styles, we'll go through one today, and we're going to pick on passive communication today. And so maybe this relates to you. Maybe this is something that you have developed over the years and you just think it's a normal way of communicating. And so what we really want to do is not condemn you, but to be able to bring into the light maybe some unhealthy behaviors that you have, some unhealthy ways of communicating. And maybe there's a root problem, a root issue why. So these 4 communication styles, number 1 is we're going to look at passive. Number 2 is aggressive. Put those together for number 3, passive aggressive and assertive. And so there's language behind that. I think that I used to color code these, color code them, and each color had a different meaning. Obviously, aggressive was red, so on and so forth. But I kind of changed the color coding and made them into more definitive thought process of each communication style. So passive, really to sum it up, is I don't count, you count. So this is all about the internal structures and belief systems coming out in our communication. So passive is I don't count, you count. Aggressive is I count and you don't count. Passive aggressive is I count and I hide the fact that you don't count. And then I count for assertive and you count. So it's putting equal importance and significance on the way that I'm communicating about myself and about the party around me. So just getting into the study here, for those of us that grew up in dysfunctional families and even healthy families, because we all have families of origin with different belief systems, whether it is that about how a man works and the value of community and family. Some family of origins is family is everything, no matter what. Blood is thicker than water, whatever a real man works at a trade with their hands. All of these belief systems actually turn into communication styles. So whether it's dysfunctional or functional families, it doesn't mean that we've learned things perfectly. We may have learned to communicate effectively in relationships. We may have never learned how to do communication effectively. We may be passive and not advocate for ourselves, aggressive and attempt to run over others, or passive aggressive and we smile while sabotaging others behind their backs. In order to build healthy relationships, we must learn to be assertive. That is, to be clear, direct, and respectful in how we communicate. In other words, we must learn to say what you mean what you say, but don't say it in a mean way. So this is what maybe the focus is, just inviting God into this time to be able to give your heart a reflection of what's really in there and really what the root of why we do what we do, because this isn't about behavioral therapy and working against ourselves to be better people. This is actually a process of identifying a root. And the beautiful thing about love, it's consensual. True love is consensual. So there is the role that I have to play is going, I found this root and I don't want that, and I don't know what to do with it. Could you take that away? And that's what a loving parent does. Is a loving parent, you know, true love has to be invited into the process. And so that's where we get this consent word. And so I really want to look at these roots. I want to look at the causes of it, and then really bring that to the altar of God, and then let Him, as a good parent, as a caring parent, to do something about it. So here we go. We're going to talk about passive communication. So passive communication is a style in which individuals have developed a pattern of avoiding expressing their opinions or feelings, protecting their rights, and identifying and meeting their needs. Passive communication is usually caused by low self-esteem, from low self-esteem. These individuals believe and say in our belief system is, I'm not worth taking care of. I have little to no value. And so as a result, this is the behavioral side of things. Passive individuals do not respond overtly to hurtful or anger-inducing situations. Instead, they allow grievances and annoyances to mount, usually unaware of the buildup. But once they have reached their high tolerance threshold for unacceptable behavior, they are prone to explosive outbursts, which are usually out of proportion with the triggering incident. So it could be, over and over and over a series of weeks and months, they have the words of the in their head that I'm not worthwhile, I'm not worth taking care of, and they feel like they get ran over all the time. And so a little incident will spark a massive explosion. And so after the outburst, however, they would feel shame and guilt and confusion, and then return to the passivity, the belief system that I don't really count, that I'm not really worth taking care of, that I really have low value. And so the communication style actually comes out of a belief system in my heart. So this is what, and I really don't want anybody to feel condemnation. If this is a style that you are very familiar with, then please don't come under the condemnation, but understand that God wants, as a representative, as a child of God, we want to move into a healthy pattern, a healed pattern. And so maybe just like a little kid gets a sliver on their finger or their hand, if they don't do anything about it, it could get swollen and infected and cause serious problems. And the reality is, if mom and dad don't know about it, there's what can you do about it? And so this is actually bringing the sliver in my hand to God and going, oh, I've ignored this for a long time. There's pus coming out of it. It's swollen. I can barely move my hand. And we need dad and mom to be the great physician and to extract the pain and maybe take some medication to get rid of the toxins. And so that's really what we get to do, is God's really going to relieve us of this bondage of self inside of us. So don't come under the condemnation of oh, this is my pattern, this is what I always do. People trample me. I never get my opinions out. I never can say anything right. I'm always embarrassed of what I say and all of this stuff. People make fun of me. And it's just better off to sit in the back row and say nothing at all. and maybe you're that maybe this has been happening for your lifetime, and maybe you're the kid that always sat in the back row, and when the teacher asks a question, you always look down and go, don't ask me, because I have no value, I have no worth, I'm just going to be made fun of anyway. Really, what's the point? I'm not worth it. And so we can have this low self-esteem of ourselves. It's still a form of pride, because we just think of ourselves in a negative light. We still are thinking about ourselves all the time, but just in a very low way. Okay, so passive communicators, this is will often, this doesn't have to be everybody, this is just a broad spectrum, but the passive communicator will fail to assert themselves. They will allow others to deliberately or inadvertently infringe on their rights, violate boundaries. We all have boundaries that we set up. They can be healthy boundaries or unhealthy boundaries, but most people that have this passive style really have, we all have normal boundaries. We can change where the lines are, but oftentimes they will have their boundaries violated. So what happens when somebody's violating me or taking advantage of me or infringing on my rights? I actually become resentful of it. I feel it. I think about it all the time, and so I will gain loads of resentment, and that fills my mind. Fail to express their feelings, needs, or opinions, tend to speak softly or apologetically, always saying sorry. Oh, I apologize. Often, I know that we can all do that all the time. Like, oh, I'm sorry. And somebody says, why? What are you apologizing for? But this is just as a heart position of always being apologetic for everything I say or do. Exhibit poor eye contact and slumped body posture. And so oftentimes a spiritual issue, a spiritual root of an unhealthy, from an unhealthy place that's feeding me, we will really get to see our spiritual condition out of our emotions and then even physically. So what's happening in the spirit will always come out physically. And so when I go to the doctor with this kind of stuff, they just give me medication. But oftentimes medication can help, but let's get to the root cause and the root effect. And that's where we need the power of God in our lives. And so that is a promise that God will take these things away from us. And so we have to invite him into that. Okay, so the impact of a pattern of passive communication in these individuals will often feel anxious because life can seem out of our control, often feel depressed because we feel stuck and helpless, often feel resentful, but even unaware of it. A lot of times, I know running groups and doing group therapy, oftentimes we can't identify our own resentment. So I actually have a resentment starter sheet where there's a lot of questions, and it just gets us going, priming the pump, so to say, of the resentment pump. And because our needs are not getting met, wherever our needs are not getting met, we have resentment and fear. We often feel confused about because they ignore their own feelings, unable to mature because real issues are never addressed. Passive communication will say, believe, or behave like this: I'm unable to stand up for my rights. And so we actually believe these lies. The enemy comes in through our minds and starts speaking to us, often in my own voice. It's not in some creepy, weird, low voice. It doesn't say, you're unable to stand up for your rights because you're not worthwhile. The enemy doesn't come talking to me like that. The enemy comes actually talking in my own voice, and says, I don't know what my rights are, using the first person. I get stepped on by everybody. I'm coming into agreement with this belief system. I'm weak and unable to take care of myself. That's the enemy is speaking to you, and using the first person. I'm weak. I'm unable to take care of myself. People never consider my feelings. I'm never considered. I'm not ever considerable. I'm not worthwhile. And these are the voice of the enemy that is coming in through your mind and feeding you lies. And then we come into agreement with those and make vows. And then we shut our mouths. We go silent mode. And we have this internal tension and struggle. And this is not a place of neutrality. This is not a promise of recovery, but this is a plan of the enemy to destroy you from the inside out. And so this is number one, style number one of 4 styles of communication, passive. What's behind it is I don't count and you count. So we want to change that. We want to eventually get to an assertive manner of a communication because of the inside change within us. But we have to identify it. So that is number one of the 4 styles of communication, passive, I don't count, you count.